Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody from UN Women Training Center. My name is Kamsawat Visuk, a Training Capacity Development Specialist at the UN Women Training Center. It's our pleasure today to welcome you to the 10th Virtual Dialogue organized by the Training Center. And indeed, it's our first time for 2017. Today, we would like to bring to your attention on the topic around understanding change through training for gender equality. It's very lucky for us to have a very broad audience joining us today from different parts of the world, from different areas of work, from different range of organization, government, civil society, international organization, UN agency, and also academia. This is part of the Training Center Community of Practice, or the COP, which hosts more than 1,800 experts and practitioners in the field of training for gender equality. I think this is part of our attempt to nurture dialogue and discussions around this issue to help us to advance this field further, to ensure that we are doing meaningful work to contribute to the advancement of gender equality and women's empowerment. Today, we are very honored to have three wonderful, highly qualified and experienced experts who are joining as the guest speakers. Allow me to welcome Claudy Vouhé, founding member of the Francophone Genre en Action Network, Maram Barqawi, monitoring and evaluation manager at the Jordan Education Initiative and instructor of eval partners, and María Bustelo, Rector's Delegates for Equality and director of the Gender Equality Unit at the Complutense University in Madrid in Spain. And the webinar will be moderated by Ruya Lekari, our consultant. Allow me to discuss a little bit about virtual dialogue and its purposes. At the UN Women Training Center, we believe that creating knowledge and sharing learning in a participatory manner is very important. It's part of our attempt to nurture the discussions on in the field. It's a mechanism for us to continually discuss, change, and share knowledge and lessons learned. The virtual dialogue has more than just a webinar. It has 3 weeks in total, 2 weeks for 3 weeks of forum discussions on the COP, and of course this 1 hour and a half webinar. About the topic today, it's a big topic, and I'm sure we would hear interesting from our expert. I think training has been used immensely many times by many projects, many programs, and many work, but we would like to understand more what actually can change from training for gender equality. Since Beijing Platform of Action in 1995, training for gender equality has grown in importance globally. It's used as a tool for gender mainstreaming, and it's used as a strategy for advancing. But we always have to ask why we do training, what can we achieve from training, and what training can actually change. So these are the big questions that the UN Women Training Center has proposed for us to discuss, to collectively think together on how to define what training for gender equality can bring about. And this is part of a process for transformation, or an attempt, a humble attempt to transform through training. So I'm going to go directly to the objective of these discussions. The main 3 questions that we have been asking, we will pose to the panelists. What kind of change can training for gender equality aspire to? What kind of change has it led thus far until now, up to now? And how can change through training for gender equality be assessed and evaluated? I think these are key questions that all of us trainers and practitioners have been having in our mind. So to move ahead, because we have short time for this interesting topic, I would like to invite Ruya to moderate the session and then introduce our guest expert. Thank you so much, and again, warm welcome everybody, and thank you so much for the three experts who have shared their time with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Cam. My name is Ria Lagari. I'm consultant for the Training Center's Virtual Dialogues, and we're now going to turn to presentations by our panel members. Afterwards, I'll be posing your questions to the panelists. Please remember to send in your questions using the Questions tab on the right-hand side of the webinar platform. You can send these in at any time. We'll be monitoring them, and then we'll pose them to the panelists. And any questions that we don't have time to get through because of a lack of time will be posted on the COP discussion forum. As Cam mentioned, the discussion forum is open now, so we hope you will all join us in the debates there. Now on to the presentations by our esteemed panel. As Cam mentioned, we are very welcome and extremely lucky to have with us three experts who are going to speak to us about understanding change in our field. First of all, we have with us today Claudy Vouhé, a founding member of Genre en Action, a leading Francophone research and advocacy network. Claudia is a gender expert who specializes in training, supporting gender mainstreaming, and gender-responsive budgeting, especially in West Africa. Over the past 20 years, she has worked with many women's organizations, international agencies, and national institutions. Claudia, I'd like to ask you to please begin your presentation now.
Bonjour. Alors, j'ai choisi aujourd'hui. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong language. Sorry.
It's fine.
Sorry, I'll start again in English. Right, okay, sorry. Okay, well, thank you very much. It was a very tough topic, and I have to say, I did spend a little bit of time thinking about, the angle that I would approach it with. And I chose to start with the question of, what kind of training can trigger change. Next slide. And I felt it was important to remind ourselves that while training can be a trigger, it can be an accelerator of change. I think very often we use it as a trigger, thinking that it will actually help to embark a process of change. I think that's something we need to challenge, actually, whether training is always the good first step in the process. But I wanted to emphasize the need to remember that creating institutional change towards gender equality has two very important dimensions, an internal dimension and an external dimension. And I feel that very often we tend to target training towards only one dimension, and that this is actually creating a barrier towards institutional change. The first dimension we need to think about is the internal dimension. That is the one that is looking at the organization itself. How does the organization itself works on issues of, for instance, balancing work and life? How does it work on equal opportunities amongst its own staff, equal pay, issues of gender-based violence at the workplace? How does it also budget for internal change towards gender equality? The other dimension is the external dimension of institutions, and that's looking at how organizations plan their policies, implement their programs, their projects. So that's looking at their procedures, their processes, indicators, tools, skills of staff in gender budgeting, including in gender budgeting towards gender equality. And I feel that very often we tend to focus on the blue dimension, the external, and forget the internal dimension. And I think it's quite important, because if we look at the green dimension, the internal dimension, we need to recognize that when we do that kind of gender training, we are trying to touch people as individual workers, whether they are paid workers or voluntary workers, but they're people working in the organization. And we know that when we manage to change their place in the workplace, when we manage to boost the reconciliation of work and life, for instance, when we manage to challenge gender culture of an organization, we touch on people as individuals, but we are also starting a dynamic, a collective dynamic that is influencing the workplace, but can also influence people in their private life. when we look at the blue dimension, the external dimension, we're looking at creating a collective dynamics that is going to help us reach gender equalities for what we call beneficiaries, different target groups that are being targeted by policies and programs and projects. And of course, when we do that, we try to impact staff as workers, as professionals, giving them the tools, the skills, the knowledge, the data that they need to better implement their programs and projects. But we cannot forget that people are never just one thing. They are never only individual, citizens or just workers. We have, we are all of us 2 or 3 or 4 things at the same time. And we need to ensure that we don't just target an external dimension and push gender equality in organizations that are themselves intrinsically, internally, quite discriminating in terms of gender. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, thank you. The other point I wanted to mention is that we should also be careful to recognize that an institution is not the sum of individuals or individualities. And that is very much taking on board the fact that we need to make sure that we build in a whole gender system through gender training, a whole system that is going to make an organization, an institution, develop its own, gender DNA that is not going to be only linked to individuals within the organization. And very often, in fact, in my experience as a trainer, I feel that this is what is happening. If we are embarking on training individuals that come from different organizations, but we are not certain that the organization, the institution is actually behind that training, supporting that training, making it compulsory, rewarding it internally, not necessarily putting into place a mechanism for monitoring, for looking at whether training actually brings change. I feel that we are building the capacity of individuals, but that doesn't necessarily sum up to building the capacity of an institution. And that is often the case. I can see a lot of people joining training as individuals. Sometimes their institutions are not even aware that they are part of a gender training. So therefore, when they go back to the job, nobody's actually asking, okay, you've got those new skills, you've got those new tools, what are we going to do with them? What is this going to change in the practice of the organization? So looking at the institution as a whole and not as the sum of individuals, for me, is really, really important. And that really needs to shape the kind of training and the strategies for training that we develop. Next slide, please. So just to sum it up, because I was given 5 minutes, how can training evoke such changes? Well, first thing I would say is that there are no recipes. I mean, nothing works for everybody and everything and in all situations. But I think that we definitely need to think about who are we training? How do we address people? Are we addressing people as workers or as citizens? Are we talking to them in their capacity as a professional person, thinking that, okay, gender is part of their terms of reference, therefore they need it? Or are we also taking on board the fact that as individuals, if they do not develop a gender awareness, a sense of their own gendered self, the chances that we are not going to have the same impact with training? I think it's quite a common thing to have in your workshop or online e-learning, people who are very good technicians, very good with gender as a technician, but then in their private life, from what they are saying or things you can hear, from outside, that in their private life, they are not at all gender aware as citizens. And that is obviously creating an issue. The other point is, you know, around the who is the trainer? Is the trainer a gender expert or gender trainer, or is the trainer a gendered expert or gendered trainer? Somebody who has gone through the work of deconstructing, you know, their own gender construction, somebody who is really taking this perspective of understanding where they come from, also in terms of their own gender construction. And we know that there are tools that can help us to develop that. Very often I fear nowadays we do have trainers who are good gender technicians but do not have maybe the, you know, the gendered soul that gender deserves, you know, if we want to bring about change. Which means that in terms of the what, we really need to work on the gendered construction and biases of both professionals and individuals, and of course also trainers that are embarking in the process. So we need to both work on attitudes and practices in private life, in society as a whole, but also attitudes and practices at work. And I'm not saying that we do that as part of just one training, but very often, and that's my how, very often in my experience, we are given very short time to develop training, to implement training. We are giving one-off opportunities to train people as opposed to, you know, embarking in a continuous process. We are asked for recipe training, you know, checklists, tick the box. We don't have time to embark on more reflective tools. We're not giving the time to actually make the alliance between, you know, the private and the professional. And for me, this is really a sine qua non condition for change, is to really go back to a more feminist approach to gender training. I feel that we have lost that in a big way, and I think that's quite worrying. More reflective, more feminist, and some tools and approaches that are more geared towards emancipation and women's empowerment. I feel that, you know, with the kind of gender mainstreaming that we are pursuing over the last maybe 10 years, we have lost a lot of the feminist and a lot of the empowerment content of gender training. And I think this is really more and more increasingly creating a real obstacle to the kind of transformative change that we should be aiming for with gender training. And I will stop for now.
Thank you so much, Claudia. Your presentation was very excellent, and I think you raised some very important points. And hopefully we'll come back to those when we start with the questions from the audience. Now we'll turn to Maram Barqawi, our second speaker. We're very fortunate to have Maram with us. She's a certified expert with over 15 years of experience in monitoring and evaluation, performance management, setting smart performance indicators, data collection and analysis. She has collaborated with agencies like UNICEF, UNDP, ESQA, and USAID, and has carried out projects in many places in the world, from Jordan to Egypt, Lebanon, and Morocco, and India, just to name a few. Maram, I'd like you to please begin your presentation now. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm happy to join you in this interesting topic and presentation. First of all, I would like just to introduce the training in general. So it's your way to change and to affect individuals and collective transformation toward gender equality by, of course, raising awareness and encouraging learning. So first of all, I would encourage you to do a needs assessment at the beginning, just to assess the needs for the training and a pre-test of how the individuals were before introducing our training. And then we can go with our training and track the individuals across the and after the training. So next, please. So yes, this is the famous model for tracking and evaluating training. It's called a Kirkpatrick 4-level model, and this is used for any type of training, and it's an old model, but however it was developed, enhanced since I think 1950 or 70 till now, and you can see the 4 level. We will start by reaction, learning, transfer, and results. Next, please. So yes, the 4 level which can be implemented for any training. The first one is reaction. And here I would mention again that please start with a needs assessment and a pre-test, just to set the baseline for your people or beneficiaries to see what sort of effect you did for those. So the first level of assessment is the reaction, the immediate reaction for your training. This could be toward the training material, the instructor, the venue, anything related. Afterward, you can check the learning, and the learning here you can check the knowledge, the amount of knowledge you were able to raise because of your training. Next, please. Okay, then the behavior, and sometimes the behavior will take some amount of time to be implemented, and we are assuming that people will change their behavior due to the new knowledge they acquired because of our training. So we will go back and check for behavior. Sometimes we need to conduct another test or to go and to site visit those individuals or to have like a checklist to see their behaviors. Several sort of evaluation tools we can deploy to check behavior. Level 4, which is a result among the institution. Sometimes this institution could be a home for individuals, or like the country or the organization where they are working. So determine the return of investment for those organizations after sending their staff or individuals to attend the training, if it was worth the time and the effort, the money to invest. Next, please. Okay, on several levels, we identified individual level, household dynamics level, and organizational level change. And to identify several type of changes, you can see for individual change that first of all, you are increasing their skills and confidence of participating and to represent women in public sphere and formal politics. This is an example of a change that you can witness for individual. Another type of change, the training advanced the capacity of participants to integrate gender in their work. So you can track those changes. Maybe it will take time to witness some of those changes, but still you can witness some of those changes, and it depends on your objective for the training. For example, if you are introducing specific training to men to change in the household, you can go back and track their ownership to share of domestic and care work inside their home. Organizational level change, you can check for change agents creation, causing a multiple effect which help to institutionalize knowledge from the training. Increase the capacity of partner organization to conduct gender analysis, for example, if you are targeting, let's say, government organizations, and you assume that after the training they will conduct a gender analysis or assessment. So you can go back and check with them if they implemented this or not. Next, please. So yes, and to track the change or the impact, you can identify indicator from the beginning. And indicators will change. It depends on the level of results you are tracking. For example, direct results will be a very simple indicator, such as the number of people enrolled, completing the training, pass the final exam. Afterward, you can check for another advanced indicator, such as the percent of people who change their behavior, adapting new techniques or attitude. Percentage of participants who, after finalizing the training, for example, after 6 months or 1 year, you can check for evidence of positive change in their attitude, behavior, or their practices. So yes, so after the training, you can implement the post-evaluation or post-test and compare pre and post, and to see the changes you affected those individual, and conducting maybe a qualitative study would give you more in-depth information. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maram. Your presentation was very insightful. We've got lots of important questions to ask you afterwards. But for now, first we'll turn to our final presenter, Dr. María Bustelo, who we're also very grateful to have with us today. And María is the Rector's Delegate for Equality and the Director of the Gender Equality Unit at Spain's Complutense University in Madrid. She also directs the university's master's degree on evaluation of programs and public policies. She's published widely on a range of topics, including training and evaluation. We're also very proud to have her as a member of the UN Women Training Center's expert group on training for gender equality. María, I'd like to ask you to please begin your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Ruya, and very happy to be with you today. And I was asked to think about the idea of the type of change and how to assess and evaluate this change with gender training. And I thought that it was really a good idea to try to apply this to a concrete situation in this case in the Complutense University. Please, Natalia, next slide. I mean, the idea of talking to you about the Complutense University is the idea that really we know that context matters and matters a lot. So when we are talking about gender training, we need to think about what's this gender training for whom it is planned, and of course for what purposes. And in this idea, I think I am in a privileged situation about thinking of gender training as part of a mainstreaming strategy at the university. We are quite lucky in Spain because we have some legislation which oblige the universities to have a gender equality unit, which are supposed to deal with the gender equality policies and for mainstreaming gender equality in the universities, right? So for me, gender training is really a key element of these gender equality policies. Because it's a way to do this awareness raising. That is, it is not only at the individual level, and I really liked both presentations by Claudia and Maram, because it's not only at the individual level, but we also aim at an institutional change, an organizational change. And for that, what we would like to do is to implicate the people in that change. For that, it is really important the idea of a strategic perspective, and in this I will insist very much on something that Claudia said that I think it's really important. We are not talking about this kind of toolkit recipe kind of training. We are talking about something that we have thought strategically, and it's really training plan from this perspective. So we have thought about who are the actors of this gender training and who are the participants. And for example, in the university, it's really important to think not only about the students, but also to think about staff, both academics and teachers and researchers, and the administrative staff. But also we need to think about the different fields. We need to think about the different schools, the different structures. Of course, I'm talking about, I mean, from the Complutense University, we are almost 100,000 people in this community. We're like a big city, so we are thinking about a big thing. Please, Natalia, next slide. So what type of change? And I must say, I mean, it's the same as Claudy. I mean, I didn't have too much time, but it was really a tough and very interesting topic, right? To think about really what type of change are we looking for. And I put like a 3-level thinking about the university that is the following one. The first one would be the awareness about how gender relations impact all what it is done at the university, how we think and how we do things. And in a sense, I have called it like a gender glasses wearing, right? I mean, it's the idea of helping to put to wear gender glasses to everyone in the university community. And this would be, of course, this entrance should be through the individual level, because really that awareness, we really need to go to the individual. Although, of course, we have organized the training and we have planned the training in an institutional way. Okay, the second, the second level will be, is not only a matter of awareness, not even the idea of wearing these gender glasses, but it is also the willingness towards gender change, and especially feeling that you are a key person in the institution to pursue that change. And of course that you can, and it is good that you are involved in this change. So this second level will be a mixture of individual institutional idea. And then, of course, we are doing all that because we really need the people to be involved in the different projects and in the different activities. And it's not only a matter of being involved in those projects and activities that maybe we can plan from the gender equality units. It's the idea of the university community planning themselves. I mean, doing the analysis themselves, wearing these glasses, but also thinking that they can do something else, and of course, planning themselves some kinds of activities. And this will be, of course, the institutional level. If I can tell you the truth, I would say that the gender training that we are planning and that we are implementing here at the Complutense University has, of course, all these objectives. And I can tell you that I have another objective which is really important, that is searching for allies. Okay, searching for allies in the university community for these gender equality policies. Okay, so next slide, Natalia, please. Okay, so that's the difficult thing. How do we evaluate this change? I was thinking that really a good thing is trying to following these steps, in this case applied to the university, and these steps would be like awareness raising, and then attitude toward change, and then institutional implication. And I think we need to do that. Of course, we have advanced a lot in evaluation of training, but I would say that we have done a lot about training the training product and its quality. And of course, even something, not only the training product, but also some kind of the part that Maram was saying, like for example, the reactions. We have worked a lot, and I know that in the Global Training Center you have tackled that issue, that is all the things about resistances, right? About all the resistances that we get when we start in a gender training. And we have worked with that, and in the book that we have edited along with Lucy Ferguson and Maxine Forest, we have a chapter by Emanuela Lombardo and Lud Mergert, especially on these resistances, right? And the idea that we really need a little bit of reaction and a little bit of resistances, because we are talking about power relations. And if we are really doing a feminist training, we are going to get resistance back. And if we don't, maybe we are not doing something really in the depth that we need to do it, right? So of course we have evaluated a lot on short range outcomes, something on short range outcomes also, but much less on long range impacts, especially in applications for change, how the people are applying all that they have been trained in, and especially the sustainability in time. I have the idea that it is not only important that we change people's attitudes, but also that they are maintained throughout time. And for that, the institution is really important. I mean, to try to keep on that motivation for gender change, and we really need to assess and evaluate that. And of course I would say, and I will end this also saying about the importance of the doing the evaluation in a concrete institutional context, and not only doing evaluation in a global way. And of course all these that also I think it was Maram tackled it, is all this idea of the multiplying effects. We need to get and to provoke these multiplying effects in institutions. So in any case, thank you so much, and I don't want to spend more time because we have the questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. Your presentation was wonderful as always, and really got to the heart of what we're trying to tackle today. And I'm just going to change the screen to my screen so that we can see the questions that our listeners have been posing throughout the day. Can you see my screen okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Right, now we're going to turn to the questions. And throughout the webinar, I've been monitoring the questions that you've been sending in, and we're going to try to get through as many as we can in the time that we have. So thank you very much to everyone who sent in questions, and I'm sorry if we can't get to all of your questions, but these will be posted on the virtual dialogue forum on the COP platform afterwards. And we've asked the experts to, if they have time before the 14th while the forum is open, to go and reply to your questions if they can, and you can discuss them among the members. So now we're going to turn to the questions. Okay, so the first question we have today is what can be done to ensure senior management support? I think this is something that we've all, that all our presenters have talked about today. So what can be done to ensure senior management support in terms of political will and financial and human resources to achieve institutional change for gender equality? I don't know which one of our attendees would like to speak about this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I can say a lot of things about that.
Please, Maria.
Yeah, this is Maria. I think this is a really key question, Lucy, and we know that's really important. And sometimes it is not so easy to get. I mean, even you can have a really high political will and even some financial human resources, but then you have some senior managers who are going to put some resistances on that. So it's not only, I mean, you need everything together, right? You need the political will, you need the human resources, and you also need this senior management support, and you need to reinforce that with some specific training that sometimes is not so easy. It depends on the culture, but for example here that it's in Spain, and this is probably the Latin culture, I mean, senior managers are not so willing to get training. I mean, they are not for that. So, yeah, I think it's the idea of trying to get everything together and work together with that.
Excellent. Yes, please, Claudia.
I also think that we need to remember, and also we need to remind them, the senior management people, that they are ultimately responsible to make sure that the organization that they are managing is in tune and in coherence with the law, with the policies. And I know that sometimes it can, you know, it may seem as a bit of a forceful way of doing things, but you know, we've got constitutions, we have laws, we have, you know, all sorts of conventions that have been signed, and particularly if you are dealing with a public sector institution, they are liable to the legal framework. And I think we need to remind people of that. You know, not in a forceful way, but, you know, in a you know, an obvious way. And I think that we should always be prepared to use two types of arguments. And I always tell my students, you know, they need to have two pockets, you know, one pocket with like, you know, legal and efficiency arguments, and one pocket full of more like, you know, rights, human rights arguments. And we need to be able to combine these different types of arguments, because we know that senior management people, first of all, they do not form an homogeneous group. And I think I would very much go towards what the third presenter said earlier on. We need to find allies. And senior management is not a monolithic group. And even within senior management, we will find people, and not necessarily women, but we will find people who will be, you know, very much, you know, prepared to do something. So I think we need to be very strategic in, you know, finding the allies, making the right alliances, but also, you know, developing the right arguments coming from different corners to ensure the senior management. And maybe training is not always the best, or at least, you know, not the kind of training that we usually are asked to do, you know, like in a workshop. But, you know, maybe we're talking more about, you know, on-the-job training. We're dealing more with, you know, being around, supporting the senior management in, you know, in various tasks. Maybe it's more like a backup, you know, a backup system, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Backstopping kind of support that we could be dealing with. You know, we know senior management, you know, they're always busy. They don't necessarily want to be trained together because they don't necessarily want to expose what they know, what they don't know. I mean, you know, there's a power dynamic which is very strong very often at that kind of level. So we need to be, you know, even more strategic maybe than at other levels.
Can I add a third thing? I mean, a third pocket that I think it will be it will be a great, because I think, Claudy, that it's really very nice. I mean, the one pocket, the legal provisions, the second one, the human rights perspective, and then a third one that is trying, and especially working with men, with senior management. With men, they always feel quite guilty about, I mean, quite challenged, right, and guilty. So this idea of, you know, everyone, even myself, for example, I use very much that with a rectoral team, right? Even myself, I can also have sometimes this kind of gender cognitive biases. So we all do that. And I mean, it's normal. You don't try. I mean, you won't feel bad about that. We all have these cognitive biases, and the good thing is that we can try to analyze ourselves and then decide politically that we do not want this. So we are working together on that. And for, at least for me, this has worked really well.
Excellent. These are very, very good insights. And I'd like to include maybe Maram in this discussion as well. There's a question that one of our listeners has posed specifically for you, which is quite related, about how successful can an organization be if they try to affect institutional change without first going to individual change. And our listener, Ogbelayu, asks, do they go hand in hand or can they be separated?
Yeah, actually it's like a puzzle. So we need to approach both the organization and the individual employees. But it depends maybe on the training type. So if we are trying to change or affect the organizational policies or procedures, we will first conduct, as always, a needs assessment or a situational analysis, and then approach the organization management, HR, the directors. Then we will go to the second tier, let's say the individual employees, and try to engage them and get their buy-in to the change, because eventually they are the implementer and the people who are going to believe and to change their attitude and practice based on those new changes.
Excellent. I agree. I think I like the idea that the change is like a puzzle, and it involves more than one step and several steps together, and that are all interlinked. And I'd like, Claudia, maybe this is also related, that Ogbelayu has also asked for you, do you think being gender aware as an individual creates greater success towards achieving gender changes in an organization?
Oh, definitely, I think it does.
Mm-hmm.
I think it does. I think you can be convinced, or you can be forced, because you're the top manager of an organization that has got, some legal obligations to, to do gender. But I think at the end of the day, what really matters is that your ears, your eyes, your heart, your soul are always open to pick up, gender disparities or injustice when they are around. And I think that's the problem we are facing. When we only do gender because it's part of the TOR, then the minute it stops being part of the TOR, the minute nobody is around to check whether you've done that bit of the TOR, then you drop it. But you cannot drop it if you are yourself a very gender-aware person and you think that gender matters, not just as you write your programs and projects, but also because you look at the way that, maybe your colleague is treating, his or her other colleague. You look at, you listen for, those funny jokes, that go in organizations and that are, very often, sexist jokes, and you react to that. So I think being, gender aware on a 24-hour basis really helps you. It's tiring. Sometimes it's really tiring because you'd like to switch off because there are just too many things. But I think it helps you to not lose track of what it is that it's all about. And it helps you to really see that, sexism and gender inequalities and stereotyping can take so many different forms, and that you can be fighting at so many different levels and reacting and making your colleagues aware of certain things at so many different levels. It may not always make you a very popular person in the organization. You also need to find a way of, bringing things along that are not going to make people aggressive towards you, or, thinking, oh, here she is, or here he is again, with all the feminists and the gender stuff. So it's also finding, a balance, a strategy for doing it. But definitely, I think
on that,
not in the TOR, I don't think this is going to go too far.
I agree. I think this ties in very nicely with one of the questions we received about how do we sell feminist approaches to training when many organizations are nervous of the term feminist. And I think maybe, Claudia, if you want to speak about this, and then Maria and Maram, if you have an opinion on this, it would be very interesting to hear.
I have found over the years that I'm just going to speak about one particular tool, which is, part of the feminist toolbox, but you don't have to, put it forward as a feminist tool. I'm talking about the gendered biography, autobiography. Asking people to write a couple of pages in their own time, sitting in their own living room, wherever, about how did they themselves become a gendered person, reflecting on what happened during their childhood, reflecting on what, you know, how things were in their own family, reflecting on how things were, you know, within the, you know, with the brothers and sisters, reflecting on whether they've been all along, you know, complying with gender norms or defying gender norms. You know, did they ever stand up because they felt, wow, you know, this is not fair, you know, standing in front of something that you think it's not fair. And I have seen, and it's not, I mean, the objective of the exercise is not to make people collapse, but I have seen people going through that exercise and then sharing it, not sharing the result because that's a private thing, but sharing how they felt, analyzing their own gendered construction. I have seen some really top, you know, you know, people in management and men including, just collapsing, thinking, my God, you know, I have not realized how unfair or how complacent I have been with gender inequalities all these years. I have not realized how much I've been part of the, you know, the perpetration of gender norms and unfair, you know, system. So I think to realize that, and it's what Maria was saying, to realize that you are part of it and that you cannot always be, you know, a perfect gendered person. You've got your own biases, you've got your own, you know, cognitive issues, but to actually realize that you are made of that. You are yourself the result of a gendered process. And then you can decide what to do with it. Go ahead with it because it suits you, or, you know, start acting about it so that it changes. I think that is having a feminist approach. And you don't have to call it a feminist approach. You just have to do it.
I think that I mean that the last sentence, I mean, I think you don't need, you have to play feminist. You don't need to say it. I mean, it's and this is the way to being strategic. We are not going to try to change the whole world, and there are a lot of resistances to the feminist kind of word and concept. But I think that every good gender approach to anything we do, a really good gender approach is always feminist. So I'm very clear on the idea that strategically we don't need to use the word feminist, but we really need to be feminist. We need to do feminist evaluation. We need to do feminist gender training. We need to use feminist pedagogies and feminist analysis. I mean, I think that I will leave it like this.
Yeah. I agree completely.
I would like to add something that for me, since I'm living in a special area of the world where we are maybe affected by the social norms or gender norms here, and the change is very hard here. So we stopped using the equality. Now we are using equity more and just looking to be fair enough and giving the same opportunity for women such as men, not like we are seeking to replace men or to empowering women so that they are stronger than men. It's just being fair enough. So we are using a more critical word so that to avoid any resistance.
I think that's an excellent approach, and I think that might feed into the last question that maybe we could touch on very briefly because we're already running a little bit over time, about what kind of change we should be looking for. And do you agree that these, I think all of you have talked about strategies already about how we can measure change, the tool that Claudia mentioned, the pedagogies that Maria mentions, and the approaches that you've mentioned, Maram. And I wonder if you want to give just a final summation so that we can close the dialogue.
For me, you mean?
Yes, please.
Oh, yes. I would look for, and I think the keyword was mentioned several times, sustainability, so that if change happened, if training was successful and we achieved capacity building or raising awareness among the participants, but we need to go back and to check for sustainability and to make sure that the change was achieved in the community, in the household, and even that people or stakeholders were able to collaborate together in order to sustain the change and make it more rewarding somehow.
I agree. Claudia and Maria, do you have any final words to add?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I completely agree with Maram. I definitely for me it is very important to look for institutional change and the idea of the institutional change, and of course it's not the sum of the individual changes, it's much more, and for me a very good indicator of that institutional change would be the implication of different individuals in the institution, and of course also the institution itself involved and implicated in this gender change over time, of course.
Yeah.
And that's,
I think for me a very strong indicator is whether we have done anything that will survive the departure, the retirement, the going on holiday, the change of staff. Because if we lose those people who are heavily involved, that we've managed to convince and to, make gender aware through training, once they go, and people go, what remains within the organization? So I think for me there's really a strong issue about how do we model, what kind of modeling of gender do we manage to instill within organizations? How do we change the procedures? How do we change the processes? I'm doing a lot of gender budgeting, for instance. Changing the processes of putting together a budget is enormous. And it has to happen. And I think that's really something really important. There are more and more organizations, for instance, that are developing gender markers. And for me, very often, they're still far from, what they should be. But for instance, how do we develop gender markers in our own organizations to actually mark not just, the skills, the capacities, the implication, the commitment, but to actually mark the transformation, the impact of that commitment. How does that commitment, how does the fact that training people, how has that impacted the organization in terms of its processes, in terms of its communication? There are so many different fields that we can observe, that we can monitor, that would actually tell us whether the organization is going into a sustainable way into gender equality in a way that it will actually survive the change of staff. Because I think we do have a real issue with institutional memories, enormous.
I agree.
So how does it register? How do you register gender within the organization itself?
That's an excellent point, Claudia. And on that note of a very good point about monitoring and achieving impacts and sustainable change, I'd like to thank you and Maram and Maria for your wonderful insights. I think we've had a very, very successful discussion here today and really expanded our understandings of change through training for gender equality and the interlinked qualities of that. And thank you very much to all our listeners, everyone who joined us here today, to our wonderful panelists, to Cam for his introduction. I'd like to mention that this webinar has been recorded and will be available on the Training Center's Community of Practice webpage. Please also remember that the virtual dialogue will remain open. The discussion forum will remain open until the 14th of May. So we urge you all to participate in the forum, and we hope that you will continue to add to the debates and take forward this very, very interesting discussion on change through training. And afterwards, as a final pass, we will have a final report available on the COP platform. So thank you once again to our wonderful panelists and to our audience members for making this webinar such a success. We hope you'll see you in the virtual dialogue discussion forum. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria.
everyone.
Maria.
Thank you.